Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today, I'm looking at some 2025 Dynasty buys. As always, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Let's go. So, my first one, Malik Nabers. Now, you don't need me to tell you that Nabers is a great wide receiver, but I still think the stink around the Giants is preventing people from seeing exactly how high they should value Nabers, which to me is very, very high. So, in his rookie year in 15 games, 109 catches, 1,204 yards, 7 touchdowns, 170 targets, 7.3 catches, and 80.3 yards per game. Now, Nabers dealt with a concussion, which kind of slowed him down. He missed 2 games, and then he was slowed down in the middle of the season. But even despite that, he had 18.2 fantasy points per game, 7th among wide receivers, and that's playing with Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, Tim Boyle. Horrible quarterback play. So, why do I have Malik Nabers as a dynasty buy? Well, he's a target hog. He has an elite ceiling already, an absolute top prospect, 22 years old, and the Giants quarterback situation right now. So, in his first 4 games in the NFL, Nabers averaged 8.8 catches, 96.5 yards, and 13 targets per game. This was an elite player right from the jump. It didn't even take a couple weeks like it did Justin Jefferson in his rookie year. Elite immediately. This pace would have been 149 catches, 1,640 yards, and a whopping 221 targets across a 17-game season. We don't have to wonder if Nabers could be elite. He was elite immediately upon entering the NFL, which shouldn't be shocking, considering his prospect profile. He averaged 120.7 yards per game with 14 touchdowns in his final college season at LSU. This is not a Puka Nacua-like player who came out of nowhere. If Marvin Harrison Jr. had not been in the 2024 class, all the focus would have been on Nabers and how he was the best prospect at wide receiver since Chase in 2021 and the second best wide receiver prospect in like the dynasty era of the last 10 years. Now, Nabers turns 22 in July, so he was already this great at 21 years old. Imagine what could happen if he gets better. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but it easily could. And then the Giants quarterback questions have opened a buying window for Nabers. There's not going to be a window, I don't think, once the Giants get a quarterback. They're not going to have, Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are playing for their jobs. They're not going to have Drew Lock as the quarterback. It's going to be someone better. And I think Nabers is going to be the dynasty wide receiver 1 in the near future. Now, with that in mind, there aren't too many trades actually involving Malik Nabers, so you have to get creative. But I will say, there are some dynasty content creators, I'm going to leave them nameless, who are a little behind the times, I think. I have seen still Nabers ranked behind CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown in dynasty formats. Now, CeeDee Lamb had 1 season that was this kind of target hog level that Malik Nabers had this year. And Amon-Ra, again, took multiple seasons to get to this level. Malik Nabers was this immediately and is 4 years younger than these players. There's no question who I would rather have, but I still think some dynasty content creators are a little bit behind the times here. Then, if we're going to go with a stud running back or a stud wide receiver, I always want the stud wide receiver. I'd rather have Malik Nabers over Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs. I'd even be willing to add a pick to do it. I remember in one of my own leagues, I traded Breece Hall for Malik Nabers plus before last season started. That worked out very well for me. So this type of move, I would absolutely be willing to do. And then Malik Nabers plus anything for Justin Jefferson. Quietly, I'd rather have Malik Nabers in Dynasty. That might be a hot take. He is 4 years younger, had a better rookie season than Justin Jefferson. Not that Justin Jefferson is old. He'll be 26. That's not old. But if you can get a plus with Malik Nabers for Justin Jefferson, I do it. Take the 4 years of age back because there's no comp for Malik Nabers as a rookie. He was the best rookie in terms of earning targets, which is the most predictive thing of future success of any rookie wide receiver ever. So I think that he's pretty much a sure thing. So I would do this type of formatting deal as well. Now, next up, Drake London. Again, you probably don't need me to tell you that London was good in 2024, but he was even better than I think people remember. In 17 games, he had 100 catches, 1,271 yards, 9 touchdowns, 158 targets, 5.9 catches, and 74.8 yards per game. He was Falcons' clear alpha wide receiver one, dominated targets, and played even better with Michael Penix at quarterback after he replaced Kirk Cousins. London averaged 16.5 fantasy points a game, 14th among wide receivers, similar fantasy points to A.J. Brown. And London is still young and struggled with bad quarterback play from Kirk Cousins for a large portion of the season. Now, why do I have Drake London as a dynasty buy? Well, let's kind of break down a few separate areas. So, in the 3 games with Michael Penix, it's a small sample size, but he averaged 7.3 catches, 117.3 yards, and 13 targets a game. It would have paced for 125 catches, 1,995 yards on 221 targets across the full season. Of course, that's not going to happen. But we saw a very good player with Cousins and a potential elite player with Penix. Now, let's look at some other metrics. London had a 29.1% target share in 2024, 6th among wide receivers. And when he was on the field, 30.3% target rate, 3rd among wide receivers. That's very elite. That means when he's on the field, he's being targeted over 30% of the time. That's an elite number. And in yards per route run, also very efficient. 2.45 yards per route run, 10th among wide receivers. So we have 3 statistics. He's in the top 10 of all of them. There's no doubt. There's no projection. London is one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. It's, somewhere up there. Now, he turns 24 in July. He was borderline elite in 2024, but why couldn't he take one final step forward in 2025? He did all of this at 23 years old. Wide receivers typically fully peak between 25 and 27, I'd say. He had his breakout in 2024. Now 2025 could be the final step. Now, when I was putting in the data for this video, there's something going on with the Dynasty Daddy trade database. It seemed like all the data was gone. But I did find a few trades. Buy Drake London in 202 for Saquon Barkley and Mark Andrews. Now, we know from my team building strategy that I prefer to build around young wide receivers, quarterbacks, and superflex. So for me, I'd rather have Drake London than Saquon Barkley and Mark Andrews combined, let alone with the 202, which I'd rather have over Andrews. So for me, this is an easy one for the Drake London side. I did see this one, Drake London for T. Higgins. I don't really get it. Drake London to me is worth more, but I can understand why. Might be tough to do this now that T. Higgins looks like he's going to get the franchise tag and is going to be in Cincinnati. I think people for his dynasty value were hoping that he'd leave. And then this one I actually came up with on my own. In a super flex, maybe you could send 105 and 205 for Drake London. Even though draft picks rise in value, I think I'd be willing to take this risk. Drake London is an elite player, very close to it in Dynasty. 105 is not going to be that in this Dynasty rookie class, even in Superflex. So I'd be willing to take this type of gamble and buy Drake London at this cost. Now, if you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. Right now, I'm offering a 50% discount at all tiers using the code TylerYT. You get my rankings, including newly posted rookie ranks, access to the Discord, all my write-ups, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month, $3 with the discount, and include all of that, plus options for direct message fantasy advice at higher levels. If you want to know more about the Patreon, check out my Why You Should Join the Patreon videos on the channel. They're featured on the homepage, and I'm probably going to be doing a new one maybe in a couple of weeks. Now, I will say, this offseason, I've done more Patreon-only content. There's been a whole write-up series about every NFL team, and then additional Patreon-only content, including video roster reviews in the Discord, a couple of other things. And I have noticed that it's bringing in, or the retention rate on the Patreon is significantly higher. What has not helped is just these regular videos. I'm not saying I'm going to stop doing YouTube content, but it's not bringing anyone in. It's not working. So we're going to have to see, but I'll just say that the YouTube won't be expanding. There's not going to be more YouTube. There's a question of whether it's going to be less and more Patreon only content. I'm going to stick probably to just rolling out the YouTube videos that succeed, probably not trying anything new, probably not doing rookie content on the YouTube until after the NFL draft, things like that. Those things flopped last year. I probably won't be trying them again this year. But I have a great plan for Patreon-only content. I'm going to cover the NFL Combine on the Patreon only, not on here. So if you want to hear my thoughts on all of that, I would love it if you joined the Patreon. Otherwise, keep watching the YouTube for whatever content is available on here. With that said, we'll get into my next player. So I kind of feel like a broken record with this. I've been talking about buying Brock Purdy for a while. There's been a lot of dialogue about him. We can argue about it forever. People can argue about it forever. It's irrelevant what we think, right? I mean, you can say, oh, is he worth 55 to 60 million? Probably not, right? I mean, but is he going to get paid that with how hard it is to find a starting quarterback and the cap consistently rising, and how if you lock up a quarterback on a long-term deal now, it looks like a bargain in 3 years? Yes. So Brock Purdy's going to be paid no matter. You can complain about it in the YouTube comments all you like, complain about it on Twitter all you like, but that's not going to change the reality. The reality is that he's going to get a long-term contract, and he deserves it. I mean, this year he was still good. 65.9% completion, 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 8.5 yards per attempt. I mean, think about that, right? I mean, we have really good quarterbacks who have entire careers who don't ever break 7.5 yards per attempt. He's broken 8 all 3 years. 257.6 passing yards a game. That's good too. And he even started running a little bit more this year. 66 carries, 323 yards, and 5 touchdowns. But he didn't have as many passing touchdowns. So that's why he wasn't as good for real life. But he still averaged 17.8 fantasy points per game in 4-point passing touchdowns, 10th among quarterbacks, just behind Sam Darnold, just ahead of Patrick Mahomes. But he was good. I mean, he was still low-end QB1. Now, why do I have him as a dynasty buy? Well, there's a lot of dynasty buy. There's quite a few reasons. He maintains strong accuracy and efficiency on a per-throw basis. Like I said, most quarterbacks would kill to have one season where they're above 8 yards per attempt. He's done it all 3 years. His touchdown rate, though, fell from 7.6% in 2022, 7% in 2023, 4.4% this year. I'm not saying 7% is normal. That is high. But for the 49ers offense, which is a pretty good offensive scheme with good weapons, 4.4% is a bit low. So I think the truth is probably somewhere between that 7 and 4.4. The 49ers struggled with injuries to Brandon Ayuk, who tore his ACL, missed the whole year, basically. Christian McCaffrey, who missed all but 4 games. Ricky Pearsall, the shooting injury, and then it took him a while. I mean, Ricky Pearsall played 11 games, but he was only really a part of it for like 4 of them. And then Purdy had some injuries. Deebo Samuel had an injury and kind of obstructed the offense, to be honest, when he was out there. And also, I do think one thing that went kind of under the radar was the switch from Christian McCaffrey to Jordan Mason completely changed the offense. When it was Isaac Guerendo, it was the same offense. But with Jordan Mason's a completely different player. Jordan Mason is a 0 as a receiver. The offense was more run heavy. You had to do a completely different offense with Jordan Mason. Whereas Isaac Guerendo, obviously he's not Christian McCaffrey, but we kind of got back to the passing to the running back, that type of offense. We saw that again when Isaac Guerendo filled in for Christian McCaffrey. We did not see that when Jordan Mason filled in for Christian McCaffrey. So I do think that also hurt Brock Purdy's value a little bit. And of course, Purdy's long-term deal will insulate his dynasty value. We know that. Now, buying Brock Purdy, I do think this is an opportunity to buy Brock Purdy for 110 and Jonathan Brooks in a superflex. I mean, that's wild to me. Jonathan Brooks is worth nothing. So I would easily do that. Purdy, 107, 207 for Caleb Williams and Xavier Legette. I think Legette was a total bust in 2024. He looked awful. I would rather have the 207 and just take a chance on someone else over Legette. And then Purdy and Williams, I'd probably lean Caleb, but it's close. But the 107 obviously swings it to the Brock Purdy side rather easily. And then this last one, again, the Dynasty Daddy trade database was having a weird moment this morning. But I kind of made this one up. So 108 and 26 first. I think that's fair. That's more fair value. But if you wanted to buy Purdy for something more fair, this would be something I'd still be willing to do if I needed a quarterback, especially on the clock. Maybe you can get something back with Purdy for this offer. Now, I've got one little piece of NFL news, and then we'll go into Patreon questions. Andy Dalton re-signed with the Panthers. Dalton signed a 2-year, $8 million contract with $6 million guaranteed. He'll be the backup for 2025. And of course, I think this closes the door on the Panthers signing any other quarterbacks, drafting any quarterbacks. Not that it was really open. I mean, Bryce Young is the clear starter there. But Dalton has continued his career for a while. Turns 38 in October. And we know that if Bryce Young gets hurt, Dalton can come in and keep the offense afloat. So it's a nice deal for Dalton. Probably still worth rostering in most Dynasty Superflex leagues, but of course, he has no actual Dynasty value. So first up on the Patreon questions, which trade destination is best for DK, best landing spot for Chris Godwin fantasy-wise? To address Godwin first, I think signs are kind of pointing towards him staying with the Bucs. And considering how amazing he was before his injury, it's hard to say that another destination would be better. I mean, he was really good on this team. So I don't know about that. Probably just want him to stay. As for DK Metcalf, I do think there are spots where he'd be more of the 1A or even the clear 1. Whereas I do think at this point, we saw that Jackson Smith-Njigba is the 1A and DK Metcalf is the 1B. And I don't think that that's going to change. The Packers do kind of stand out to me as a team that lacks a true wide receiver 1, whereas Metcalf will be the wide receiver 1 there. Not even the 1A. He'd be the 1 and everyone else would be 2A, 2B, whatever. With that said, though, I honestly don't see a trade happening. Why don't I see a trade happening? Well, Jackson Smith-Njigba remains under contract for 2 more years, plus a 5th-year option in 2027 for wide receivers. That's usually around probably around $18 million, which is still cheap. Metcalf's contract expires after 2025. So assuming his ask isn't ridiculous, they can afford to pay Metcalf 28, 29, 30 million a year with the cap going up for 2026 and 2027 easily. And then after 2027, they probably are going to have to make a decision on these guys. They're probably not going to be able to keep both guys after that. Wide receivers like Metcalf are hard to find. They're not replaceable. So I just don't see the trade happening. They are able to manage their money in a way that is probably unnecessary. Next one, how to trade for 26 or 27 picks as a contender. Well, in general, I love the idea of trading for future picks, but as a contender, it does deplete your assets for the current year. Typically, I'm more focused on trading seconds or thirds to use later, eliminating players I don't want from my roster. But yeah, I mean, as a contender, I'm not sure trading for 26 or 27 picks will be my focus, if that makes sense. Last one. Who are some year 2 or 3 receivers you can see taking a big jump in 2025 that might not be getting discussed enough? So let me just say this. Overall, we're getting better at identifying breakouts. The content community is saturated. Are there really players who are not being talked about? I mean, no, right? Who could even have a year 2 or year 3 breakout? I mean, who does that even in that category? I mean, Ricky Pearsall, I think, is someone who did not break out, who could break out in year 2. A lot of people are talking about Jalen McMillan. I'm not as confident in him. But, I mean, people are talking about those players. Those are not under the radar players. And then, you could have Jaden Reed or Josh Downs kind of taking a step forward, maybe. But again, people are talking about those players. So the only one that I think is not really being talked about at all is Cedric Tillman. And Cedric Tillman is not being talked about at all because he was really good for 3 weeks and then had the concussion and never played again. So, was that real? I don't know. I mean, there's no real way to know. He was bad for all of his rookie year, bad before that. So I'm going to lean probably not. But Cedric Tillman is the one I can see who's really not being discussed. Everyone else who could be a breakout is already being talked about. There's no random under the radar player that I really see that meets this requirement. Now, if you liked the video, make sure to support the channel by subscribing. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty content year-round, covering rookies, everything else. And there's a 50% discount at all tiers using the code TylerYT. You can click in the top right corner, patreon.com/fantasy advice, and sign up there. And every sign up helps support my independent content, namely the YouTube channel, but also other things. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.